I thought I knew how to boost my energy, until I tried Cayce's ritual for a week. The results shocked me. I spent 7 days using Cayce's energy ritual. I expected skepticism, maybe a few quiet moments, possibly a placebo effect. I did not expect my dreams to begin rearranging themselves, or for a single phrase, soft as a whisper, to turn up in my thoughts at odd hours and make the rest of the day feel quieter, like someone had tuned down the noise. This is what happened. Edgar Cayce's work, what people call the readings, offers a particular language for the inner life: souls planning before birth, forgetting purpose under the weight of daily living, a post-death review that reflects rather than punishes, and a law of attunement where vibration draws experience. I approached all of that as perspective, not proof. I used those ideas as scaffolding, a way to imagine what might shift if I intentionally practiced remembering for a week. If you want the 7-day checklist I used, check the description below. The rest of this is my journal: what I did each day, what I felt, the images that came, and how I tried to interpret them through Cayce-inspired metaphors. I call these practices Cayce-inspired because the readings don't hand us a neat step-by-step energy ritual. What I used was a reconstruction, drawn from themes in his work: breath and intention in the morning, a small midday act of compassion, an evening forgiveness visualization and journaling, and simple dream journaling at night. They are prompts, tools for recollection, not guarantees. What follows is personal, subjective, and offered with the same compassion that runs through Cayce's language: curiosity without judgment. According to Edgar Cayce's perspective, souls choose certain lessons before incarnation, and then, in the fog of embodiment, forget parts of that plan. The afterlife in this view is less a courtroom and more a mirror, a life review that reflects choices back to the soul so it can see itself clearly. There's also talk of a borderland, a twilight place between lives where emotions and unfinished ties can tug at the newly freed awareness, and of the Hall of Records, a storehouse of impressions and agreements. All of this gives a poetic map for a ritual aimed at remembrance. If forgetting is the condition, then the ritual's function becomes gentle recollection. Day 1, resistance and breath. I woke with a small knot of skepticism in my chest and a checklist on my phone labeled Day 1, morning alignment. The morning practice was simple: 5 to 10 minutes of breath work, slow inhales, longer exhales, paired with a single intention: remind me of why I am here today. I felt foolish saying it aloud the first time. Saying why I am here feels grandiose. I softened it to what matters now, which felt both humbler and truer. During those minutes, the body protested. My mind ran through errands, messages, a grocery press. Breathing like that felt like trying to tune a radio station while someone else kept changing the channel. Still, after the 3rd round of breath, the noise thinned for a moment, and a small image surfaced. A gray field, flat, colorless, then a faint circle of light on the horizon. It wasn't profound, it was a flicker, a weather change rather than a revelation. But the sensation was clear. I noticed my chest expand, not just with air, but with a slight loosening, as if the ribs had been holding a secret tension. Midday, I set a tiny intention to act differently in one small moment. When a colleague interrupted me in a meeting, I stopped myself from snapping back, and instead asked a question to understand. The action was ordinary, but afterward I felt steadier. That evening's ritual asked me to visualize chords, strings connecting me to resentments, to past slights, and to breathe them away toward a soft light. I wrote 1 paragraph in a notebook, an admission that I hold small grudges I'd rather not teach my children. Before sleep, I left a pen by my bed, and, as instructed, tried to capture any dream fragments. I remembered a hallway painted the color of old letters, and a sense of searching. I recorded the word search and fell asleep. Day 2, the slight shift. On the 2nd morning, the breath felt easier, or perhaps I felt more willing to let a moment be quiet. My morning intention felt less like a demand and more like opening a window. Today, show me one thing that matters. Cayce often used the metaphor of a divine magnet of mercy, an attracting force for the soul. I won't claim I felt a magnet, but I did feel more attuned to small emotional cues. Where I was often hurried and defensive in the past, I found myself slowing when a text arrived that normally would have triggered irritation. For someone who thinks they are unremarkable, this felt remarkable in its smallness. A midday micro-practice now felt more natural. I paused to listen to a cashier who wanted to talk briefly about her day. Listening was not hard, but it was an intentional redirection. I'm uneasy labeling this as karmic repayment or spiritual scorekeeping. Instead, I'll say it felt like choosing a different channel. By evening, a memory of a promise I had made years ago, an intention that had been softened by life's demands, rose up. It was small, an agreement with myself to write more regularly. The forgiveness visualization that night included an extra moment where I imagined laying down an old agreement with someone who had once hurt me. I visualized the cords loosening and dissolving into warm air. The dream that night was quieter. A table of weathered maps and a hand tracing a route with a slow finger. I recorded the word route and felt unexpectedly hopeful. Day 3, the Borderland Dream. Day 3 is where the narrative grew textured. In Cayce's terms, the borderland is a twilight place, neither fully memory nor complete forgetting, tinged with regret and unresolved ties. My dream that night bled into the morning. I woke with the echo of standing on a gray shore, watching small lights move out into an indistinct sea. In the dream, I felt both behind the lights and ahead of them, like someone looking at a past life and a future promise at once. Waking, the memory lingered not as a story, but as a mood, softened edges, a sense of tender inspection. That morning, the breath practice included an extra phrase, "I remember the promise I made." Saying it felt risky. A part of me feared that remembering would expose failure, but the ritual's tone was gentle, remembrance as reconstruction, not accusation. Midday, I found myself forgiving an old irritation preemptively. A friend texted asking for advice about a job she'd lost, and instead of lecturing, my usual reflex, I simply named what she might miss and what she might seek. This felt like clearing space rather than fixing. The evening journaling led me to sketch the gray shore and the lights, not in fine detail but as shapes. I began to see a pattern, dreams returning certain images, shore, lights, maps, which suggested a common language was forming. Day 4, memory and soft release. On day 4, I felt a physical loosening, less about ideas and more about musculature. My shoulders were less stubbornly raised, my jaw unclenched in the afternoon. The morning breath included a visualization of descending, a lowering of vibration, not in a negative sense, but as a way to dwell in the body without fleeing into distraction. Cayce used language about descent or embodiment as part of the soul's plan, a lowering to experience. Framed compassionately, that descent is not punishment but choice. I thought of it like lowering a curtain so the light inside could be seen. During the midday micro-practice, I chose a different kind of small compassion, giving someone the benefit of the doubt in a work exchange when I would normally have been immediately suspicious. The payoff wasn't fireworks, it was a slower cadence to my day. That night's forgiveness ritual landed on a memory of a parent's impatience and my long-held belief that I needed to perform to be loved. I breathed and imagined that old cord loosening, sending a soft, warm light back along its length. The act of writing about it made me feel as though I was returning a borrowed object, taking back something that had been held in trust. My dream that night involved a hall lined in ledger-like pages. I didn't read them, but a feeling of relief was present, as if records were more descriptive than prescriptive. Day 5. Synchronicity and the Hall of Records. On day 5, a small synchronicity occurred. I ran into a person at a cafe I'd known years ago, someone who once mentioned a childhood promise they'd made to teach. In the conversation, they casually used a phrase I'd been thinking about for days, "Remember the work." I didn't interpret this as proof of anything mystical. I did notice the effect. The world felt slightly fitted to my internal inquiry. It was as if my focus sharpened the edges of certain encounters. That night, the dream imagery aligned with something from Cayce's language, the Hall of Records. My dream was not cinematic. It felt like opening a file cabinet where each drawer held a scene of small choices. I reached in and touched one, not read it, and felt a reverberation in my chest, like a bell rung softly at distance. Waking, I did not believe I had access to cosmic database. Instead, I experienced a sudden empathy for people who had hurt me. The ritual's forgiveness visualization that day included seeing not just cords but faces, companion souls who have been both support and friction. The practice reframed these relationships as complex contracts rather than simple wounds. Day 6. deeper empathy, less pull. On day 6, I noticed a qualitative change. The material pulls, emails, impulsive shopping, news headlines still existed, but they felt less authoritative. That is, my immediate reaction to them had softened. A voice that usually demanded immediate consumption receded into the background. My morning alignment felt less like begging the world for meaning and more like tuning a radio to a station that had always been there. I made a small choice. I turned off notifications for several hours and walked in a part of town with old stone buildings. The walk felt like stepping into a different tempo. I moved more slowly, and in doing so, I noticed small details. Light catching on a window, a dog watching the world with unfussy attention. That evening, I did a variant of the forgiveness visualization. Instead of focusing on chords to particular people, I imagined chords to certain outcomes: success, recognition, safety. Visualizing breathing those chords into light and releasing them felt like lowering the weight I thought I needed to carry. My dream that night did not present a hall of records, but a simple mirror. Looking into it, I saw a younger version of myself with tentative eyes. There was no condemnation, only an invitation to speak kindly, to name one thing I would teach that younger self. I woke with the instruction, write one honest thing today. I did. The exercise felt like reclaiming a promise I'd tucked away. Day 7, remembrance and a quiet clarity. The 7th day arrived with a sense of culmination rather than climax. There was no thunderbolt. There was, instead, a quiet clarity that felt like the outline of a room becoming visible because the lights had finally been switched on. I had one final morning alignment where I set an intention to carry one remembered truth into the day. The phrase that surfaced, again, not claimed as divine revelation but personal felt truth, was surprisingly small. Be present for what matters. That morning, presence turned routine moments into small edges of practice. Listening fully to a friend on the phone, savoring coffee without scrolling, giving a child an explanation without rushing. In the afternoon, something tender happened. An email arrived offering a collaboration I'd been half hopeful for years earlier but had not pursued. I didn't rush into it. I responded with a clear, calm message shaped by the week's practice. The reaction from the other side was warm and immediate. A small opportunity unfolded. I can't say the ritual caused that email. I will say that my response felt different, less reactive, more anchored, and that difference shaped the exchange. That night, I sat with my notebook and reread the week's entries. The maps and shores, the gray fields and lights, the hall of records, the mirror, these images had threaded through the days like a single tapestry. The final forgiveness visualization paired with a quiet vow, not a vow to achieve a new miracle, but a promise to continue practicing the habit of remembrance. I wrote a short affirmation: I will come back here when I forget. The dream that night was gentle, a small light hovering in my palm, warm and patient. I woke with a softer jaw and a clearer sense that whatever the soul's plan might be, pieces of it could be reclaimed through practice. How to read these results? None of this is evidence in a scientific sense. These are subjective reports. When I say I felt looser, more present, less drawn to certain impulses, I am describing internal states, not external proof. Cayce's framework, pre-birth planning, vibrational attunement, the borderland, record keepers, provides a poetic map for the imagery that arose. If you prefer a different map, the practices can still serve. Breath, intention, small acts of compassion, nightly review, and journaling are tools that have been used across spiritual traditions in various forms. I simply framed them through Cayce-inspired metaphors because those metaphors helped me interpret the dream imagery and emotional shifts. What struck me most was the law of attunement as an experiential tool rather than a metaphysical decree. The idea that vibration attracts experience can be read as a claim about a cosmic mechanism or as a psychology. When you change your inner tone, you change what you notice and how you respond. Over a week, tiny recalibrations, pauses, breathing, choosing compassion, began to alter the way I encountered the world. That change does not mean the world changed magically. It means my perception and my actions shifted, and those shifts had consequences. Practical takeaways. If you're curious to try a Cayce-inspired week, here is what mattered to me. Keep the practices short and consistent. Don't expect dramatic miracles. Treat dream journaling like a conversation rather than a test, and lean into forgiveness as a clearing tool to dissolve the emotional cords that tether you to old stories. The morning alignment does not have to be elaborate. 5 minutes of intentional breath and a single phrase, "Remind me of what matters," was enough to orient my day. The midday micro-practice is deliberately small, one intentional act of compassion or one deliberate choice away from reactivity. The evening forgiveness visualization and journaling is where the accumulated emotional detritus gets noticed and gently released. Write one paragraph, not a treatise. Nightly dream journaling, recording a word, image, or feeling, gave the week a thread to follow. A few practical cautions. Don't use this as a replacement for professional mental health care if you are struggling significantly. Don't expect this to cure illness or guarantee wealth. The practice changes perception. It can open doors and soften edges, but it is not a formula for controlling outcomes. If anything intense comes up in dreams or during forgiveness work, treat it with care. Sit with a trusted friend, journal, or seek professional support. A final reflection. After 7 days, what I learned is less about definitive metaphysical truth and more about the gentleness of repeated attention. The ritual, Cayce-inspired as I framed it, worked less like a magic switch and more like a lamp in a dim room. Turning it on did not radically transform the architecture, but it allowed me to see things I had been bumping into. The images that came up, the gray fields, the circle of light, the hall of records, the borderland, felt less like exotic scenes and more like inner languages asking for translation. The work, to me, is translation. Noticing patterns, practicing different responses, forgiving what pulls at your attention, and returning to the remembered phrase when you forget. If you try this week-long experiment, approach it as a compassionate inquiry. Use the checklist in the description to guide the structure, but adapt every part to your comfort. Keep a notebook by your bed and limit the morning breathwork to what feels sustainable. For me, the ritual did not produce a spectacular conversion. It produced a quieter life, a steadier attention, and a handful of images that I can use as companions on days when forgetting is loud. If you decide to try this week-long experiment, tell me what changes for you in the comments below, and subscribe for more experiments like this. Above all, remember, whether you take Cayce's language as literal or metaphorical, the invitation at the heart of it is simple and kind. Remember who you are, not to shame you for what you've forgotten, but to help you live more aligned with what matters.